We're going to do a rapid fire to kick us off.
Fantastic.
Favorite pizza topping?
Pepperoni.
Book or podcast that's influenced your thinking?
Black box thinking.
Tech trend you think is overhyped?
Blockchain.
Favorite beer?
Guinness.
That's the right answer. Company other than Celerity you admire for how they've handled transformation?
Transparency.
Rugby or football?
Rugby.
Oh man, no, I thought I would trick you on that last one. All that and more on Transformers. What is transformation and who are the really fascinating people leading those transformations? Join me as I talk to my fellow nerds, not just about technology this season. Today, we're going to talk to a chief revenue officer about sales and marketing. My name is Ann Funai. I am CIO and vice president of business platform transformation at IBM. And this is Transformers, a Think podcast. Mike Gowen, CRO, Chief Revenue Officer of Celerity. Thank you so much for joining me today on Transformers.
Thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
You come from a sales background. You've grown up in sales. And I know one of the things I wanted to do with the podcast this season is to bridge that there's transformation happening, not just in traditional technical roles, but in other areas like, certainly what you're doing around revenue and sales. And you growing up in that sales background, and the way the world is evolving, you've had to really dive pretty deep technically recently to be successful. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's changed a lot. I got into sales 25 something years ago. And back in those days, technology was new, computers were new, the internet was new, and selling was partly kind of associated with educating really customers and proposing new solutions, new technology that they didn't know about. It was about, enabling them to take this transformation journey to IT, to the data center, to internet. Whereas, 25 years on, I think the conversation with customers is much more about enablement, transformation. Customers are very well aware. They're very educated. They have a plethora of information across the internet with vendors, with distributors, with partners. So often you go to a meeting and a customer is very, very educated on what you're going to talk about. Whereas probably 25 years ago, I think that the customer was less aware of the latest and greatest technology and how it could transform their business. So it has changed a lot over the period of my career.
Well, and I think not just because of your promotions and increase in position, but I think who you talk to changes over the years too.
You've seen the evolution of the CIO from maybe an IT manager or an IT director that, had an office in the cupboard at the bottom of the office where no one really talked to them, and they were maybe an IT specialist that had got promoted, through to now CIOs sit on the board. They are probably the most or one of the most important C-level execs within the business on how it can be transformed and how it can deliver increased value for shareholders or growth if that's what they require. And I think that's been a huge evolution from being just the IT manager with a small team through to somebody that is really earmarked and targeted to drive the business through technology.
Well, and even beyond that, with the CIO role often comes security, right? The cyber, the CISO type of role. Cyber is kind of where you've developed your interest over the last few years as well, in your focus. And how have you seen that piece of the pie evolve too?
Oh, hugely. I think cyber back in the day was, we'll put a firewall, let's have some perimeter security, keep them out. And then, so much has changed over time that now there has to be a whole strategy with layered cybersecurity for customers to really evolve in how they protect their business, but also an operational resilience perspective. For example, Celerity, we have a product called Copy Assure that's part of the IBM Power Cyber Vault solution that we've launched as part of Power 11. And all that is about recovery when or if. Some would say if, I might say when, that a company experiences an attack. And, with that product, for example, we can reduce the recovery time from 12 hours to 15 minutes, which for customers is huge, because you hear every day of retail businesses, finance businesses, every vertical really, has had attacks on them and has had breaches, and it's about how they're going to recover. So it's gone from just being protection. Don't get me wrong, that's really important, and detection, but right through to actually, okay, when or if this happens, how do we recover as quickly as we can, not to damage the business, not to damage the brand, but also the actual functioning of the business in terms of that minimal viable business to have an operating business while things are being recovered so that it doesn't hurt trade. And I think that's really transformed. And the separation, I think, between responsibilities, we're seeing that really spread across the C-level exec as well. So a CIO predominantly has responsible for cybersecurity, but we're now seeing operational resilience drive into the risk officer or the CFO who wants to know financially how they can sit. So you have to have conversations with people right across the business to ensure that, the customers are really comfortable and they have robust solutions in place to be able to sustain an attack and recover should it be penetrated.
Couldn't agree with you more on the not if, when. I mean, that's really, that's it's just the nature of the world, unfortunately, these days. And your role too with sales, it's cyber so gorpy. It can go way, way, way dark, like down in the weeds, not just the technology, but kind of thinking like a bad actor, et cetera. How do you raise that up and kind of keep the conversation very customer centric when you're talking to them about, transformations in this area?
I think it's a real challenge for customers because they go to these big, I mean, in the UK, it's called InfoSec, probably the biggest security exhibition. They go there and there's 500 businesses, and every single business is telling them they've got the latest, greatest solution that's going to deliver them cybersecurity. And I think customers are kind of bewildered by the amount of solutions that are out there. And what they really want is a partner or someone to sit with them and say, okay, how does this fit into our business? How can we use the best technology in the most commercially kind of driven sense to deliver protection and value? And ultimately, as an industry, without getting too philosophical, we haven't solved the cyber issue yet. We've been trying, and there's some big brains, much bigger than mine, of businesses that are out there developing incredible solutions, incredible technology, but we still haven't got there. Breaches are still happening on a regular basis. And I think that's again the piece where the operational resilience side comes in, because we haven't quite got the cyber bit right yet. Hopefully we will, and we'll improve it all the time. But as we improve, then the bad actors, the hackers, if you want to call them that, they're also upping their game every time. The stuff that came out from Russia when the Ukraine war happened and the files that were released there. These people aren't teenagers anymore sitting in their room. They're businesses. They have VP of sales. They have technical support. They're real businesses that are making money. And with the advent of cryptocurrency coming into play, probably really in strength about 10 years ago, that transformed their ability to monetize cyber. Because prior to that, it was kind of transfer to this account. If you want your data unencrypted, do this. Now it's, well, transfer cyber currency. And how difficult is that for the authorities to track? It's incredibly challenging.
Do you think, you made a comment like we're not quite there yet. Do you think we'll ever be there in cyber? I mean,
I think the analogy I always use is kind of, a bit like your house. Yeah. So, you can put an alarm on your house. You can have a guard dog. You can have locks on the back door, the front door, the windows. You need to put enough in place to have protection to ensure that something doesn't happen. But at the end of the day, if somebody really wants to get in, they're probably going to get in. Now, if you catch them early and you ensure that the damage they cause when they get in is limited, then it's not so bad. So I don't know if we'll ever succeed in stopping people getting in. However, what we may improve and what we can proceed with is the twofold. One is when they get in, how quickly we can stop them. And secondly, make sure that their damage is low and limited, and that the business can still function through an operational resilient plan.
Now, let me pick on the technical side of your brain for a moment here. Do you see any, technology evolution, approaches in your space in the next few years that you think are going to make a really big difference? And how do you evaluate, in your mind, what is or is not a good investment, is or is not something to pursue as a technology?
It's a really tough question for customers to answer, and it's something we talk about a lot. I think there's established technologies that are improving that customers just need to have. They need to have a SIEM service. They need to have AV. They need to have endpoint. They need to have these things in place to protect them. But then it's also thinking about the futures. So working with IBM, we're talking to a lot of customers about quantum and being quantum ready. Quantum is coming, and it's going to change the world of cyber, in my opinion. And if you look at all the financial institutions, if you look at some of the large utilities businesses we have and retail, everyone is talking to us about how they can limit their exposure through being quantum ready. And also in healthcare, we're speaking to a lot of the NHS here in the UK, which is the healthcare trusts. They are really invested in working alongside partners to understand this technology more. And with IBM being a global leader in quantum, it's a fantastic partner for us to have to work with. And it really will change cyber. When you look at the time difference of decryption of simple things like an RSA token would take, I think, a normal computer 3.5, 4 years. I think a quantum computer does it in like 2.5 seconds. I mean, don't quote me on the stats there. No sources to be given, but it is in that range.
You're right. It's yeah. I mean, I think just the bounds of what quantum is going to be able to do. Again, I obviously we root for the good actors in this case, but it's I'm super excited to see things coming down the pipeline in quantum. I totally agree with you there. And so, as you were going through this, though, it kind of brings to mind that it's not just about the technology, it's about the operation as well. Like you mentioned previously, minimizing damage. It's not just about, it's not just if, when, but when minimizing. And how do you view that intersection with I call it, IT and the operations, if you will?
I think it's really important to focus on when you're looking at delivering value for customers. Years ago, it was maybe this box is faster, this line's quicker, this network's more secure. But I think now it's about using that technology, not just from a technological feeds and speeds perspective, but how that interacts with their operations. So, with the advent of AI, and we couldn't do one of these podcasts without mentioning AI, you cannot talk to just the IT department when it comes to AI. Yes, they're important and they're needed in the conversation, but actually the AI conversation is with the operational team and how they can improve efficiencies, how they can drive value, and how they can really improve the business processes. So it becomes a different conversation. And actually, we're starting to see the evolution of certain salespeople to be moving from just being technology sales or just being your traditional sellers to actually having that operational knowledge around change management, around where it's contact centers, whether it's processes within the business, whether it's Six Sigma, whatever it might be, that they've got that knowledge so that they can talk around user cases for AI and how that can really change and transform how a business works. And I kind of don't really sit in the camp that AI is going to take everyone's jobs off them. I don't believe that's going to happen. I think that AI is going to enable people to do more with what they've got and to be able to deliver more value. And that's the conversation we're having with customers.
Again, I'm actually with you on that camp too. I think of it as, there's a set of entry-level skills that we're just changing what the entry level of skill looks like. And, align it with the Industrial Revolution, whatever phase in history you'd like to. We're probably, I've always thought of it as like, there's what the hype cycles, right? We're in hype 1, we're going to have a trough of discontent. We're going to come back and, really, hopefully, my hope, we'll be able to really take advantage at that point. So I'm super excited. Now, I love your point of view there. And what I think is super interesting too about sitting on the seller side is that you see a lot of different customers on a daily basis. So, the technologists, you get deep in the company you're with, you might talk to a few people at other companies. I talk to CIOs at other companies, but, it's kind of a lot of shared behavior, but you really see different industries. You see different, you might see finance, you might see retail, you might see, another tech company. And do you see a pitfall in common as people are going through some of this, I'll say cyber transformation, maybe the smattering of AI, since we have to mention AI and everything as well? Like, have you seen the common patterns of pitfalls, or keeping it positive, common things that drove success as well?
The vertical knowledge of working with specific customers, having specialists in it, is so powerful. We've got specialists in healthcare, we've got specialists in finance, and specialists in retail and utilities, and those people's knowledge is really, really powerful. And from an operational perspective, like we were talking about before, they understand those industries better than anyone. However, at my level, when you're talking to a wider range of customers, as you describe, there are the same themes that are coming across. Quantum's definitely a theme that people want to talk about, being quantum ready. But my favorite one of late is going to meetings and CIOs or IT directors saying, Mike, I need to do some AI. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? The board's told me we need to do AI. And the motivation behind it, right? I make fun, but the motivation behind it is accurate, right? The businesses, if they're not adopting and changing and using AI now, then they're already behind and they will be left behind. And companies know this, but what the theme that we're seeing is that they kind of don't quite know how to use it or what to do with it. So they want to talk to someone and they want to talk to a partner and explore, and they want to talk to people like IBM around what's next and all the incredible stuff that technology can do, and really understand from a business user perspective how that can transform their business. That's probably the most common theme that I see at the moment. We need to do some AI. It's a great question or statement when you get that from customers, and it always leads to an amazing conversation. And from a sales perspective, it opens up wider conversations than we've ever had before, and really opens our eyes into how their businesses are run and used.
Yeah, and you said something that we talk a lot about in my team, which is, if you haven't touched or played with it, any of the AI out there in a couple weeks, you're falling behind by the week, right? Like it's amazing all the things you can hook up, and really just it makes a huge difference, and it's changing, I think, that operating model as well, right? There's different expectations around speed of operations.
And I think as well, don't get lazy with it, right? I say this to salespeople. I've got a great salesperson, and she's a very gifted individual. And she went to see a customer. She did a kind of, I won't name a tool, but she used an AI tool to do a load of research on individuals that she was meeting, the company, the chairman's report, got an amazing summary. But guess what? She had to read it. She had to understand it. She had to then use that information and think about how she was going to talk to the customer about it. Whereas I think some people think, I'll do the report, I'll get the report, and I won't do the research myself. And that's where you get left caught short. So I think it always needs that human element. And in sales, it's going to transform the way we interact with customers.
No, and that brings to mind, there's a piece of research I saw recently talking about how if you lead with doing the work yourself and having AI enhance you, they kind of hook people up with the stickies on the brains and to brainwaves, like those. If you lead with your brain and support with AI, huge synapses fiery. But if you're leading with AI and then you try to do the work, it's actually kind of a little bit dulled. So I think that point you made there, it's really relevant. You still have to do the work. The AI can speed you up, can be a supporting function, can point you in other directions. But if you get too lost down, let the AI do the work for me, that's where problems can start.
Absolutely. And, people buy from people, right? That expression's been around for years and it's still valid. Why do customers buy off 90% of the salespeople they work with, or the technical people they work with? Is trust. I always say that the decisions from customers are always based on two things: risk and cost. Everything comes down to risk and cost. But then who they buy off is based on trust.
Totally agree. It's I've worked with enough partners that if you don't have that right person across the table from you, just the relationship does matter at the end. Absolutely, it does. Do you see some misconceptions too? And let's expand back to cyber as well. So cyber and AI, like as you're having these conversations, we were talking about things that work, things that don't work. Do you see any like myths that you're out there constantly having to just like bust up?
There's interesting ones because it's kind of differing scales. So on the cyber front, people are ignorance is bliss. Oh, well, I've done enough and I've ticked the boxes. So if it happens, I've done my job. That never flies, right? That never flies. When something happens, your job is responsible for it, and you need to show that you've done the right things to do it. So the myth that we're not going to get hacked or we're not going to get targeted, I think that is a common myth that I see. And then the other one is around new technology. We don't need to think about quantum just yet. We don't need to think about AI in our business. We're a traditional business. We may be a distribution or a manufacturer. And I think those myths, at the two ends of the spectrum can be really damaging for companies moving forward. And I suppose from a partner or a vendor perspective, we need to demonstrate why we think they're myths, without, embarrassing or challenging a customer in a way that's going to put them in an awkward position, but just to educate them and try and provide them with knowledge and examples with other businesses. That's normally the key, is how to kind of dispel the myths, is to show examples of what they're talking about with other businesses, because they'll often believe them a lot more than they may believe a salesperson that's sitting in front of them.
Yeah. Well, and to pull that thread a little bit further, talking the seller relationship, that seller to the tech team relationship, but do you see value in really bringing the whole range, like perhaps marketing to the table, finance, like just other disciplines to really understand the impacts of cyber on a business?
Oh, hugely, yeah. I mean, even I suppose there's two sides of the table. On kind of the partner side with me, for example, I look after marketing, sales, and pre-sales, because we feel that the whole front end of the business needs to be aligned when we're talking to customers, and all those people interact with those customers and need to have the same messaging and leadership to be able to drive that forward. I think on the customer side, the conversations are relevant to all different parts of the business. And I think that you see people understanding the impact of a potential cyber attack on their specific department. And, as humans, we're great. We love being siloed, right? The job of a director is to look across the whole business. But a lot of management layer people will think about their business. Am I okay? That kind of statement. And what they're realizing is, with a cyber attack, well, distribution could be affected, finance will be affected, reputational marketing. How are we going to deal with it from a communications perspective? There's so many different aspects, and the conversation really does transcend into so many different areas.
With the marketing piece in particular, I'm recalling conversations maybe mid-teens, if you will, around 15, 16, 2015, 16, 17 with marketing when the first data privacy laws came out. So, slightly tangential to cyber, of course, but wait, no, you can't have, hey, we've got customers in the EU and the UK. There's this thing called GDPR. We can't, sorry, marketing, you can't have all this personalized information. And, I think back in those moments about, data privacy, cyber, it comes in. Because I think, to me, maybe that's one of those first moments. I remember some of the really good conversations I had with the marketing team about like, hey, and, this could get stolen, right? There's reasons that we call things sensitive personal information. So I think, the whole discipline coming around the table, working together, it is that client-centric view too.
And data is everything. Data is our business. It's what we talk to customers about every day, how to protect it, how to use it, how to improve it, how to store it. Data is so powerful. And I find it ironic that we live in a world, in the corporate world, where data is the new oil, if you want to call it that. It's probably an old expression, but it is that important. The data is still that important. But then on the flip side, in the consumer world, if we want to search for something, we have to click away all our rights and give away all our data. So you have these GDPR from a corporate perspective, but you go on LinkedIn, you can find out most things about people's families, people's lives, where they've worked, what they earn. It's incredible that we have this dichotomy across corporate worlds, which have regulation, quite rightly, around data privacy. But then from a personal perspective, we seem to share everything with the world just so that we can use an application that, is funded through effectively advertisement.
Yeah, no. And it's interesting. I was having a conversation with a 14, about to be 15-year-old this week, and just such a different view.
I have one of them.
Yes. This is a stepchild here for me. So it's, but they have such a different view on the world. Like, so, for us growing up and coming about, like, we had this recognition of all the data and we got to protect ourselves. And I don't know what your contrast would be, if it's the same or different with your 14, 15-year-old, but they said to me, I just know my stuff is out there. Like, I have accepted that my stuff is out there, my social security number, you name it. They were very focused on like kind of the rights of people who are creating things. So we were, my partner and I bought a piece of property and we were joking what's going to be the logo for the property. And they're like, don't do that on AI. You're stealing other people's creative license. And it's such an interesting shift of thinking that, and don't get me wrong, I agree with that statement too. You want everyone to, own your own data. You don't want your creative things stolen. But what's your take? What are you hearing from the generational gap on your side?
There is such an amount of data they're producing. We maybe send a photo to a friend on a generic WhatsApp or something like that, some kind of tool, and we maybe do that once in a while. My 14-year-old is taking 15, 20 photos a day, maybe more. And I mean, in the UK, Snapchat is the big thing with the teenagers as a tool. And they're snapping all the time, all the time, all the time. So the data that they're creating is so big that they kind of don't have the concept of how do I protect that. I suppose the education I'm trying to do with my 14-year-old is that anything you write online or on an application, you have to assume is going to be there forever. And you need to think about that for the future. But I know when I was 14, I'm not sure I would have had the concept of that message and the consequences of something I write at that age that you may think is a joke. And it's just a growing up experience. You're just learning about how to function and what's right and what's wrong. And I think it's a harder time to be a 14-year-old than when I was a 14-year-old. There's a lot of different bridges to cross, and you're absolutely right around the data piece. They just accept that there's so much out there. I mean, I've also got a younger child who's just moving into what we call secondary school. I think you call it high school in the US. And it's fascinating debating with parents. Oh, they're not going to get their kid a phone. They are going to get their kid a phone. And we had some parents over. They had a 2-hour long debate about this. And my 14-year-old walked in, and one of them said, "Oh, well, what do you think?" He said, I don't think we're going to get our child a phone." And my son's response was, "So do you not want him to have any friends?" And it kind of just dispelled the whole debate. The whole debate went away, and all these parents stood there red-faced, intellectually debating data. So it comes down to relationship and personal contact and social mobility.
No, gosh, that's so true. Because I know obviously there's lots of other debates. I mean, we could go down. There's a whole other rabbit hole of, with that. But it is interesting, kind of how just the different mindset around that. So, well, let me pivot since we're talking. We're telling kid stories a little bit. I think you and I have something else in common, is a love of sport. And for me, it was soccer/football to the rest of the world outside of the US, rugby for you. And, it shaped a little bit of how you approach, teamwork, leadership. Would love for you to share about that.
Absolutely. I mean, I love football, soccer, but sadly I wasn't very good at it. I did start playing rugby at a young age. I even have a rugby cup here. So there we go. And yeah, I suppose from my perspective, I think it's the best sport in the world, but I'm biased, so that's the way it goes. But I suppose what it gave me at a young age, as I was growing up, was a real understanding of teamwork. It gave me an understanding of leadership and the responsibilities that come with it, but also coaching and watching how coaches work with teams and transforms teams, good coaches, bad coaches, how to coach different individuals in different ways. And I use so much of that in my work life. I'm an accredited rugby coach for the RFU here in the UK, and I coach my youngest team. And some of the lessons I've used teaching 10-year-olds how to play rugby, I take into the workplace. Things like not everyone needs to be managed in the same way. Some people need an arm around them. Some people need a bit of a nudge in the right direction. Some people need direct feedback. Some people need subtle feedback. And I think through sport, it's taught me so much about how to manage people. And it also gives you values around integrity and respect and authority, from a kind of refereeing perspective. In rugby, there's a big policy around respecting the referee. You watch these huge men that are 6'8", 9, and there's a small referee and they're going, "Yes, sir," "No, sir." They're not shouting at the referee, and I think that's something that instills something inside you and something I take out into the workforce. And even when I'm hiring people, it's really interesting, the recruitment perspective. If they've played a team sport, there is somehow a different understanding about how to work in a team or how to lead a team. That's not saying that people who don't play team sport can't lead, but it does give you a different knowledge and basis. And for me, it's something that I use every day. And even one of my my favorite rugby player of all time is a guy called Richard Hill. He played on back row, so number 6 or 7 for England and the Lions. And he's probably the most unassuming guy. People don't know him unless you play rugby. But he was so good at his job. He was so efficient, and he was such a team player that he would have been the first name on any team list. And you talk to any rugby expert, they'd say he's one of the greatest. But he's not flamboyant. He doesn't need to be out there. And it really taught me that kind of leadership beyond authority, that you don't need to be that person that's at the front, shouting and cajoling people, but actually there's a way of leading through example as well. So, from my perspective, it absolutely so much comes through into the business world from my sporting experience, and even now as I coach the little children, it still helps.
Yeah. Now, how does it, as you coach and mentor folks professionally, how does that play out in those professional coaching moments as well?
Development of people is probably my favorite thing in my job, right? I don't enjoy analyzing data. It's a big part of my job, and I have to do it. But the bit that I enjoy and why I moved into management is developing people. I love the fact that I know salespeople that I took on at a young age who now are account directors, sales directors. The other day I had a guy who he'd worked for me for about 5 or 6 years. He'd really developed, and he just got a job as a sales director at a business. And he sent me a message saying, "Mike, thanks so much for all your guidance and help over the years. I couldn't have got here without you." And that's the nice side, right? It choked me up, and that's the side that I love. And I think that if you're in management and you're in leadership, if you don't like developing people, then have a think about why you're in leadership, because really that's the good part. That's the bit that's great to see. And when you build something and you coach people, and when you're mentoring them, it's just great to see them flourish. And you can use so much from the sporting world, but also it's that adaptability to different individuals. Some people, you'll need to be more forceful. Some people want goals. Some people want structure. And I think mentoring and coaching for me is about getting to know the individual and then developing a system or a process that really adheres to how they work and how they can be the best version of what they can be. It's something I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, I love that. I love that shared passion here between us. So I think on that very positive note, Mike Gowen, thank you so much for joining me today on Transformers. Pleasure to have you. And I really hope our paths cross again. I really enjoyed the perspective you bring from the Chief Revenue Officer perspective.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and hope you have a great day.
And thanks to all of you for listening today. Hope to see you back in a couple weeks.